Good morning, good evening, everyone. As always, it's time for our 9 p.m. India time, 7:30 a.m. Pacific time conversation with an expert. And today's expert is someone that many of you will recognize, Dr. Vijaya Parameswaran. She's been on the community podcast in the past as well. And we'll talk about what today's topic is in a lot more detail. But let me just quickly go through a couple of housekeeping stuff. Please type away your questions in the chat window. If you're not already a member, consider becoming one. It's free, and there's a lot of great conversation like this, as well as the ability to ask questions. Here's the QR code for those who want to join and have not joined us yet. And there's also a link at the bottom of the screen. We'll post that in the comments if you want to join the community. We wanted to announce one new feature in the community that we've already put on the group, but for those of you who have not yet seen it, the thing that we have just launched is this new feature called the private Q&A with experts. So today, all the conversations are posted by members on the WhatsApp group, and then they're answered by our experts. But all those questions are out there for everyone to see. And in fact, there is value in that because a lot of us learn from each other's questions and the answers that come with it. But sometimes we have questions that we might want to not have visible. There's a certain level of privacy you want to maintain for certain questions and so on. And so what we've launched is this feature. And the way it works is now in the WhatsApp group at the top, you'll see there's a message pinned at the top of the group. It's also there in the description section of the WhatsApp group, and it's the URL over there. When you click on that URL, it opens, you submit your question directly to our experts by putting it there. So it does not show up on the WhatsApp group itself. It directly comes to our experts. And for the first time, you'll have to use whatever your Google account is in order for us to know who to send the answer to whenever it's ready. And so you put your question privately, it gets answered by our experts, and it is sent back to you via email. And any question that you ask will be answered within 24 hours. Why this matters? Like I said, your privacy is fully protected. So if you have questions that you don't want necessarily for others to know about, this way nobody else knows. All your Q&As stay organized in one place. So the way this works is, over time, as you ask more and more questions, they will all show up in your own chat window through this browser interface that nobody else can see, but you can look at your own questions and answers. So you don't have to sit and, highlight a message or tag a message. It's all going to show up in your own one place behind your login. And what this does for the community as a whole is it keeps it a quieter place. So there'll be the only messages that will be posted during the weekdays will be the ones that we will post. And every now and then we might pick a few of the questions, we'll make sure they remain anonymized. But if you believe that that helps the overall community understand the topic better, we'll share that, but your name will never be associated with those questions. So that's a new feature. We're quite excited about it because it allows you to ask a lot more questions now without feeling awkward about it. And it keeps the group even quieter than it currently is. All right. Our expert for next week is again someone who's been on the community podcast earlier, and that's Dr. Saurav Sane. He's a very well-known physiotherapist. But what we're going to do differently in next week's session is he's actually going to do a live session. So the first 15 minutes or so, he will do an actual live session, and we'll then talk about lots of other sort of theory around it, the science around it, and so on. But if you are interested to see how to do some simple stretching, balance, strength exercises, come prepared next week in your own rooms. You don't have to put your video on, but you can actually follow along and see what are some of these tweaks you can make, some of these ideas you can get from Saurabh to help live that much healthier as we get older. All right. Today's conversation is with Dr. Vijaya Parameswaran, and for those of you who were not there for the last session we did with Vijaya, it was on fasting, and it was a very, very well viewed, highly viewed session. Afterwards, the number of views of that video were very high. I think this is a topic, the fasting topic in itself was a topic that we got a lot of questions on. What's the right way to fast? How long the fast is okay? Is there such a thing as too much? Is there such a thing as not enough? And so on. For those of you who want to go watch that video, it's on our community as well as on our YouTube channel. But today's topic is another such hotbed of conversations, of misconceptions, of misinformation. The number of conversations I've seen on social media about cooking oils, I think currently probably ranks in the top 3 topics that almost everybody is talking about, and definitely the South Asian community. And so I don't think, and this I'm not trying to make it sound anything other than what it is, and that is, I don't think there are too many experts in the world, especially with a South Asian lens, who can speak as intelligently and as comprehensively on this topic as Vijay. And so, when I saw the number of requests coming on this topic, I just quickly, without any further thought, reached out to Vijay and said, Vijay, are you willing to do this? And as always, she was very gracious and agreed to do it. So without further ado, Vijaya, welcome back to the Community Podcast.
Thank you, Nikhil. This is, I can hear my echo. I don't know why. Are you able to? Yeah, it's better now. It's better. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to join the community, and it's, I feel like it's like a club, it's like you participate in this club and you have like-minded people, and you can just start a conversation that, that doesn't need much background. So I really enjoy chatting with you, as well as the club, as well as our group here and the community. So thank you for the invitation. And I really am surprised that cooking oils are still such a misunderstood topic. It's shocking to me. You're muted.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think there was more and more information that was done in the past, that was provided in the past, and people are sort of beginning to get comfortable with it. And then as social media took off, the number of people who felt like it was their duty to create misinformation about it because they were trying to sell something. And the way to sell it is to make everything that exists today sound really, really bad. And so I think that is the reason why it has sort of become an issue again, when it should have already been cleared up.
Totally agree. As it was mentioned in the intro, I'm starting my fellowship, and my fellowship at Stanford. It's the fellowship, for those of you who may not fully understand what it is, because I didn't until I started, is like a research sabbatical. So you can basically pursue whatever you want to study within the division that you're affiliated with. And in my case, I've been practicing as a dietitian for over 20 years, and especially working with South Asians, and especially primarily as a dietitian in cardiovascular and cardiometabolic health. So that's what I wanted to do in this research sabbatical. And the two people who are advising me are Dr. David Marin and Dr. Christopher Gardner. And the reason I mention these two names is Dr. Marin is the father of the ischemia trial, the trial that basically educated the whole world on how cardiology interventions are, whether they are necessary or even not necessary in terms of a stent, etc. And then Christopher Gardner is the only professor of nutrition at Stanford, and in the world very well recognized for his work. And he had done his research a meta-analysis on seed oils as a part of his dissertation when he was at Berkeley. And so now when I was just, getting ready for our conversation, I just went back and looked at his work, and it's shocking to me that 30 years later, like you're saying, with social media, I mean, I think the punchline that you want likes and you want a punchline, so controversy always spreads faster. I wish somebody said, "Oh my God, I cooked this with olive oil today; it was delicious," something like that, and you get likes for it, right? But anyway, so I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I am particularly excited that this community is so interested in such topics and goes to sources that are vetted, right? As opposed to just relying on, and not saying TikTok and other social media platforms are not, but you need to know, especially now in this age of misinformation, and this is what we are dealing with, right? When I make nutrition searches on the web now, all the AI related searches are basically coming from the top searches, which are already misinformed. So it's hard for us to tell right from wrong. Even for people like me, if I'm pressed for time, I just want to, pull the quickest search, which is most likely in the space of nutrition, incorrect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think right there is a sort of cautionary tale for us, right? Because most of us will not know the difference between right and wrong. And so I'm glad that we have experts like you are willing to take their time to educate us on this. So, Vijay, can you talk a little bit about the fellowship? I mean, you've always been in the nutrition world. You've always been in the heart and cardiology interventions world. And you've had a South Asian bent to everything you did. Given all of this, what is the fellowship about?
Thank you. So the fellowship is, so when we say it's a research sabbatical, it's basically a specific amount of time to pursue whatever, your interest is. In my case, what I'm focusing on is a slice of cardiometabolic disease, which is hypertension. And we have literature on hypertension more than, I think, 3 decades ago. We started to show that just like diabetes can be stopped early on, hypertension can be too. And the dietary approaches to stopping hypertension, or the DASH diet, has been shown in large trials over and over again, and in meta-analyses of these randomized control trials, showing that there is, if you follow this approach, that you can see a reduction in your systolic blood pressure. You can see that reduction regardless of how high your blood pressure is. You can see it regardless of what stage of hypertension you're in. You can also see it in preventing the diagnosis of hypertension, where you're at an early stage, going from early stage to stage 1. But the implementation of this is very challenging. And the reason it is more challenging than, say, a stop diabetes approach or something like that is because the diet has multiple different parts. And in South Asians, for example, when you have, so most common links with BMI is where everything, you're saying, okay, it's BMI related. Basically, you're overweight and you need to lose weight. And we know in South Asians that BMI is not the best marker, so we have a lower BMI. So I'm particularly seeing in the implementation aspect of this DASH, and looking at why has it failed and what can be done to bridge that gap. So we will be using large language models now to kind of address some of these barriers in nutrition intake. For example, if you wear a watch, you can, and you say, I walked a mile today. Your watch will help you verify whether you did or not. In many cases, it will tell you very precisely, to the extent that your human reporting is not something that we will need to rely on. We don't have anything like that for nutrition. And even though photo logging is there, it's really difficult to assess the accuracy of those images. And then it is on self-control. And when do I take that photo? Do I take that photo? I can just put a few things away and click the picture saying, this is what I ate, right? So which is how our relationship with food is like that. It is, we eat based on social cues. We eat based on comfort. It does have clinical outcomes, and food is medicine, but we don't eat food like it is medicine, right? We eat it for comfort. So in my approach and implementation, I'm trying to address some of these major gaps in implementation. We're using several different approaches to triangulate such that that information that we are asking you, what are you eating or what did you eat, can be referenced with maybe a photo, maybe different tracks. So maybe your blood pressure, maybe your glucose, maybe your activity, and give you more precise and tailored guidance. So before we do such a thing, in order to launch something like this in the real world, I get this opportunity as a part of my fellowship to try this in smaller pilots and smaller randomized control trials at Stanford. So that's what I'm getting to work doing. And I'm specifically going to be looking at this in ethnic populations, starting with South Asians, because the data is there. We know what approaches work in large randomized trials, but there is an implementation gap. And then implementing that for culturally sensitive populations, because the approach doesn't necessarily need to be changed, but it needs to be tailored, right? So if I say a DASH diet, most people here will know, oh, it's low salt, but there's so much more. And then to tailor that to, does that mean I can have amti? Does that mean I can have, usal? So yeah. So I get very excited about this topic. You cannot make me shut up. So I am going to stop.
No, actually, Kamal just posted something I was going to ask you, and that is, if you're ever looking for volunteers, I think on this in this community, you'll get people who are very motivated, because there is going to assume an aspect of a certain level of discipline, right? Because, and discipline, I don't mean of eating, of actually tracking all these things you want tracked. So just sign us up. Let us know if you're ever looking for volunteers. We put this thing. There are already 3 people who volunteered in the last 30 seconds.
That's great. Exactly. I like Aarti's comment, right? It's a complicated a strategy. And it came up with the word stopping hypertension. It's provocative, and it has shown time and again in large studies across multiple populations, right? So yeah, definitely. I mean, I want to make sure we're very responsible scientists, right? So we want to try it in environments that are somewhat controlled, not over-curated, like a randomized control trial. Like Christopher does a lot of studies which are in a really nice, tight lab setting. And what we are trying this time is to do it in a way that is somewhat exposed to the real world, but on the same token is still, tightly controlled, so we can understand the effects. So yeah, definitely, I would love, I think a group like this that is motivated and that is self-selected is a particularly good group, because you want those who say, I reduce salt in my diet, to actually reduce salt. And I can tell you more about why I mentioned this statement, but no, this is great. I'm absolutely, most certainly.
Yeah, no, perfect. So now, on related to this, as part of DASH, I'm sure cooking oils are also going to be an important piece of the puzzle. So why don't we start, Vijay, with just oils, right? There are all these different, we've heard of seed oils and this oil. Can you start with just explaining the basics of the different families of oils?
So oil extraction from whatever the product, let's say a coconut or avocado, right, comes from the combination of the fruit as well as the seed. They're basically maximizing. They probably also use these techniques on the skin. It's very difficult to precisely tell what aspect of that fruit or nut is used in the oil generation. The reason why, so if you think of like rice bran, for example, right? What does rice bran oil mean? It's basically the skin of rice, which has, you need large amounts of oil, large amounts of this product to extract small amounts of oil. So it's not very energy efficient. Seeds are much more, give you a better ROI, right? They have more fat content. Things like rice bran, imagine how much. But you can extract oil out of those things as well. So the reason why, so to answer your question, let me not go into the reasons, but that's basically overall, the extraction process and where the oil came from. I think what is important for us to think about is the properties of that oil, and then understanding whether that, so for example, coconut and palm, right? You may see that by the way, my background might blur because, and you see my rowing machine, which is my favorite machine. I just wanted to mention that, but it's distracting me. So, so things like coconut and palm tend to have very high saturated fat profiles. So the oil therefore are higher in saturated fat. But as such, when we think about oils, the general classification is whether it's coming from, you could say, vegetable oil, whether it's coming from seeds. Those are the nutrition the labeling, if you will. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and we don't need to go into that level. But basically, vegetable oil, seed oil. Within seed oil, we have also have like sunflower oil, safflower oil, canola oil, comes from rapeseed. And then you have, of course, sesame, all the other things that we use in India. Sesame oil is actually very popular. And then the other thing when you think about oils is the process of refining the oils. And that, to some extent, doesn't get talked about as much because that process of refining is also done at a large industrial scale. And there is some controversy around that process of refining, which basically renders that oil more conducive to no aromatic, flavor neutral cooking, but rips it off of its nutrients. And the nutrients mainly are fat soluble nutrients when you're talking about cooking oils. And so if you're looking for like flavorful oils, there are certain recipes where we would say we want a flavorful oil. And then for certain recipes, you would say, no, I don't want the oil to be a flavorful ingredient. So that's another thing that you want to consider. And I can, of course, go into deeper detail, but does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. So I think because we hear about vegetable oils and seed oils primarily as the two big ones, then of course there's a lot of other stuff that is used to cook like beef tallow and all of that, which is all now a lot more in the news. But at least it provides a high level view of the buckets. Now, in terms of the characteristics of an oil, what are the characteristics of an oil one should think about? And probably this is the only time we'll think about it, because after that we go back to, okay, so net, tell me which oil I should use. But you spoke about saturated fat. What is the saturated fat content? What are the other such parameters about oils that one should have and think about?
Yeah. No, so the thing is that, thank you for mentioning beef tallow. And the thing I didn't mention in my previous question, we just talked about plant oils. There is fat that comes from animals, which are used in cooking as well, right? Again, for flavor. And also it is cheap. So pork fat, beef tallow, all these things, right? In terms of the what are the things that we need to think about outside of the compounds within fat, is how are you using the oil? Because each of these oils have different temperatures that they change their composition in. And the composition here is basically their chemical structure. The chemical structure change becomes an important consideration if a lot of that oil is retained in the food that you're eating. Let's take an example of deep frying as a technique, right? So that basically then goes into the cooking technique. So if you're using a low heat stable oil for doing tadka, right? Simple tadka, it is not very damaging because you're only using tadkas. It's like 1 tablespoon oil, mustard seeds, jeera, whatever you're doing, right? The oil in a tadka is a flavor enhancer and somewhat helps release the nutrients in the food. So if you're cooking spinach, for example, the fat-soluble K vitamins in the spinach become more bioavailable because the tadka is then a vehicle for absorbing those fats, right? So the cooking temperature is a consideration because the aromatic compounds tend to be more volatile, and you lose those aromatic compounds if you expose them to higher heat. And then the second thing to consider is the change in the chemical structure. Both of these are a consideration. For example, if you like to have a very rich, let's take sesame oil, right? We use sesame oil. So when you think of like a Japanese food like ramen, right? Your sesame oil is really like pronounced there. It's like right there in front of you. And then if you use a version of sesame oil, which is a refined oil, then you do it for, podi in South India. So if you have dosa and you have podi, right? Or if you have like in pav bhaji, you're adding, not pav bhaji, but maybe vada pav is what I meant. If you're kind of mixing your dry powder with a little bit of oil, right? Like you do in South Indian food. For those, you don't want the oil to make a statement and you want a flavor neutral oil. So you could still use a sesame oil there, but you're using a very refined sesame oil, which doesn't say, hey, look, this is my flavor. What I would say, rolling back all of this, I've mentioned a lot of things here. The things to consider is, first of all, what are you cooking and how are you cooking? That how are you cooking will help you answer which oil to choose outside of the saturated fat issue. And then I will again bring it back to saturated fat. But that's basically how I think about it. What am I cooking? Where does the oil kind of stay in this? Like there are a lot of South Indian dishes where it's cooked in coconut oil, but coconut oil is also used as a dressing, for example. Right? So how you're using it is an important consideration. And of course, I can tie all of this to cardiovascular health, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, Vijaya. So if you now take the temperature, right? Because certain oils are more stable at lower temperatures and not at higher temperatures and vice versa. How do you classify them? What's the oil that you would go with, or a couple of oils that are perfect for low temperature and some others that are the right ones for high temperature?
Right. So two cooking oils that have that don't change their chemical structure as much or are more heat stable are amongst the vegetable oils. And I'm mainly keeping the conversation on that because time and again, in however way you slice and dice it, we see that saturated fat contributes to elevated LDL. And not all of us may have an LDL problem, but many of us have an LDL problem. And how do you know you have an LDL problem is if you have high levels of LDL, or if you make dietary changes and you're still, like you increase fiber, you have good quality fat, and you're still seeing that your LDL is elevated, then you have an LDL clearance issue. And although nutrition, food, diet only contributes to a small portion of this cholesterol, the contributory factors vary based on what is it that you're eating. For example, dietary cholesterol or dietary saturated fat contribute much more to your LDL cholesterol. So we're mainly talking about plant seed oils, vegetable oils, because they are low in saturated fat. And that, therefore, if you use these as flavor enhancers, as digestive aids, as how it was intended, then you can be less, so that would be the first kind of classification. The second, I would say, is that when you are thinking about heat temperatures and the 2-3 oils. I mentioned avocado oil and rice bran oil. So then this is your next level of question, okay? So first you need to make sure that you make that pass. So if I were to choose between coconut oil, palm oil, beef tallow, and those are the only choices, then I would use coconut oil as a small amount of dressing and not cook with it. If you have coconut oil, palm oil, ghee, right? I would use a small amount of ghee as a flavoring and not cook with it. But if I bring any vegetable oil now to the repertoire, if I get vegetable oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, canola oil, I would choose those because they are lower in saturated fat. Now let's talk about a combination where, say, you have canola oil, you have sesame oil, and you have sunflower oil. The three are almost similar in their nutrient profile, mostly unsaturated fats. Now I can think about, what about the seed that is used to make this? So we know that canola is made with rapeseed oil, which is very highly genetically modified. So if I have an option of choosing something that is less genetically modified, then I would choose sunflower oil or sesame oil. I would choose between those two. If I were to choose something as a flavor enhancer, as a cold on topping type of thing, then I would choose unrefined sesame oil because it is high in flavor. But I think most of us don't give ourselves this chaos with decision making at home, because these are generally done at the grocery store. And I would say the grocery store, make these decisions based on what you typically eat. If you eat salads, it's always good to have a cold pressed oil, like olive oil, because it's very high. These are flavors where the aromatics play a big role. So a cold pressed oil, like a cold press technique, which is a technique of oil extraction, olive oil, sesame oil, and I would keep those as a salad. So if you do like an Asian salad dressing inspiration, you could use those. I think those are always a good to have in the pantry. Then for cooking, I would say mostly these seed oils are gained. What is very nicely studied in large trials is olive oil. And the Predimed trial showed us, and it also done in Spanish version and all these different versions, do show us that olive oil is cardioprotective. So then I would always keep that, because that can also work as a cold oil. You can also cook with it, and unless you're deep frying. And of course, studies have shown that if you deep fry with olive oil also, you actually have a lower blood sugar lowering effect compared to, I don't remember what was the comparison there. But there you're basically losing some of these flavor compounds. It does not become carcinogenic, or those are not the things you want to. Let me take that back. I wouldn't say that, I don't think it's well studied to show that it does not turn, or whether it turns into carcinogenic. In order for us to fully study this, we would need to do it in a randomized control trial, where one group gets these seed oils and the other group doesn't. And it's very difficult to run such trials. So I would say, let's go with what we already know, which are the fats, which is with saturated fats, which is with flavor compounds, and think about how are you eating them. And so at home for cooking, I would use any combination. I always have olive oil, but also have like maybe sunflower oil if you like it, maybe have sesame oil, and having a repertoire of oils. I would think of them as, just as in our pantry, we have lentils, for example, you have masoor dal, tur dal, all these, urad dal, all these, right? So just like that, you must have a repertoire so you can participate in that cooking that way. Groundnut, yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so peanuts are a legume, and the composition of peanuts tend to be more bent towards saturated than unsaturated. So, but I think that peanut oil is also less, in terms of the nutrient profile, less in saturated fat composition, and has a better unsaturated fat ratio compared to, say, palm oil. So, so definitely, and of course, cost is a consideration. If cost is a consideration, that is another thing that you want to think about. So peanut oil is also something that you want to use for. We haven't talked about deep frying, but I'm going to pass the mic to you. And when we get to that, I can talk about things to consider there as well.
Yeah, in fact, I was just going to ask you about avocado oil and then what happens. In general, we all, I think, now accept the fact that deep frying is not a good thing. But yet, we always tend to have a meal here or there which is deep fried. At that point in time, what's the right oil to use where the temperatures get that high? And is there any specific comment on a side note about avocado oil? Because that you did not mention as much in this last round.
Yeah, I think I brought it up as the first one I mentioned in terms of heat stability. So avocado oil definitely, it can be one of those oils that you can use for deep frying because it is heat stable and is not so much of an aromatic anyway, such that those compounds are lost with deep heating. So with high temperature. So chemical structure is generally stable, and there's not much loss in aromatics. So avocado oil is definitely something that you can think about. Peanut oil is the other thing, quite stable in high temperatures. Sunflower oil, similarly, more stable in higher temperatures. I think the issue that I see with deep frying is that all of us have moved away from deep frying at home, which I think is great. But most of us have not moved away from deep frying, from consumption of deep fried foods from outside sources. So we still have deep fried foods either in the form of snacks that are deep fried or deep fried foods in like restaurants, right? The biggest issue with eating deep fried food outside is the reused, stale, highly nasty oil. Recently, I was watching this video of like this vada pav stall in Bombay. This was actually a chef, a New York chef, who was talking about his, and it's very close to my heart. I love vada pav. So he was showing this smaller kind of like shop opposite VT station, where they commercialized their operation such that they are basically running like a well-oiled machine. And I got a glance at the oil that they were using, just visually, and it looked like gutter ka pani. Even more dirtier, right? So my question to all of us is, how do we eat that? Right? And that is the worst. So when you're looking at, say, nicely, beautifully fried banana chips, right? You don't think about where was it. And when you're deep frying, that technique, especially smaller, so we say, oh, I just have shave. Yeah. It's a teaspoon of shave on my usar. The surface area of that food influences how much oil is absorbed in it. And if that basin strewn thing is floating in this gutter ka pani of sorts, it's probably gutter ka pani, I think, is healthier, I must say, Then from a fat perspective, then you're thinking about how much oil that thing has absorbed, right? And but we don't think about that because it doesn't look like it came from that. You would see remnants. So I think we're doing a really good job by not deep frying at home, but we're doing a terrible job. We, including myself, I see this, I see this repeat over and over in clinic, where we are mainly using so even good things like a tofu that is deep fried, right? You're basically changing the composition of that, because the oils in commercial establishments have to be reused in order for them to retain cost effectiveness. It's not practical. It's not environmentally friendly for them to keep changing. So whichever way you slice and dice it, they say, oh, I will only go to this restaurant because they reuse their oil. It's not practical. I would say we should just bring down the consumption of fried food.
So, as you were saying this, I was beginning to think about something, and I think Poonam just asked that same question, which is the bigger issue with the whole deep fried foods? Is it the fact that you're deep frying it, or is it the fact that that the oil is being reused? Because if it's the latter, then every now and then, can you maybe make it at home, which is the opposite of what we are doing today?
Great question. So lesser evil, right? Right. I would ask all of us, for a second to think about. So we never make business. I mean, of course, I do think we risk stratify and say, okay, which is the lesser evil. But we cut ourselves short when we're making dietary changes. I think we need to have a higher standard for ourselves and say no. But this is a great question, and I often think about it in this terms of which is less of a problem. And I would say that there are two things to consider here is that the reusing oil and the trans fatty and carcinogenic aspects of that oil is a huge risk factor. So I would avoid that. Now, if you say, okay, does that mean I cannot enjoy any fried food? And what are the effects of having fried food at home? The issue with fried food is really just that it's basically now carrying a significant amount of a fat because it's sitting in the oil and it is absorbed it, right? So calorically they are high and their fat composition is different. So let's say you use an mostly unsaturated, like a sunflower oil or a peanut oil for frying. I would say once in a while that is totally fine. So back in the day when we were doing for say Diwali, we were having like fried food, right? So I think that is totally fine. But if you're making this a regular routine, like once a month I'm frying, I think you should still think about, okay, is that okay? What are some other things I need to consider in terms of how am I eating for the rest of the day and how does this influence that? So there isn't a clear answer for the second. I would say be cautious. Eat less frequently, but when possible, fry at home in small amounts, right? So when we are frying puri, for example, right, you do need a certain amount of oil, and you say, okay, well, anyway, I'm frying puri. Why don't I just do like 3 dozens? Like, at least that's how I think. I'm efficient, right? So you're thinking, okay, anyway, I'm making puri. I'll just make for lunch, dinner, snack, whatever. Right? So you make like 50 puris, and now you have 50 puris at home. You're eating them, right? So these are all, again, other traps. So you keep thinking, okay, which lesser evil, time, this and that, and then you keep making compromises. That's why I kind of paraphrased my answer with that first thing. So I would say, more importantly, the takeaway message from this passionate conversation that you and I are having is really rethink fried food that you're eating out.
Yeah. And I want to actually double click on one aspect, Vijay, which is in fried food, we keep hearing the term trans fat, which usually has been ruled out. But I remember one of the big shocks for me personally was I used to love the Krispy Kreme donuts till I found out that there's a lot of trans fat because it is fried. And all we have to do is see the way it is being made. And that should be enough. But most of us don't have the background to know that beautiful looking assembly line is actually dumping trans fats. Are trans fats one of the biggest issues with fried foods?
Yeah. So that is one of the biggest issues, and the presence of trans fat significantly goes up when the oil is reused. Okay, so however, it is very difficult to. That's the biggest issue. The second biggest issue with trans fat is they're ubiquitous. Whenever there is partial hydrolyzation for texture, like the cream that we get in like the orange cream biscuit, how does it retain that shape, the shape? How does it not melt? How does it not stick in your teeth? It's all because it is hydrolyzed with partial hydrogenation, not hydrolyzation, hydrogenation to give you that texture. So partial hydrogenation is another thing that increases trans fats. And the third thing, the reason they are so ubiquitous and difficult for us to know that they are is because the labeling allows you to not publish your trans fats as long as it's less than 0.5, 0.9, something like that per serving, right? So if your serving size is really low, which is what most people do with like bale is like a teaspoon, like whoever eats that, how can I eat 1 teaspoon of bale and be satisfied? So that's the issue with trans fats, and you don't talk about trans fats as much. And the more you kind of get into these details, it can get more confusing. So I would say that trans fats is a good topic and definitely want to avoid. But how do they come? They are ubiquitous, they're everywhere. And how the oil is used is really the main thing. And so if you're mainly avoiding deep fried foods from outside, and if you're avoiding like peanut butter, for example, when it is partially hydrogenated, that can circulate trans fats in it, right? So I would basically, those are the things to consider. And then there are a few other things when you're thinking about fats in general that I can kind of share the framework.
Yeah, I think you made a very important point, which I want to highlight for the group, which is when you look at the nutrition label, it shows you all the different ingredients and you're looking for, I remember once I learned about trans fats, I wanted to make sure there was no trans fat. And I was to be happy when it said, 0 grams of trans fat. Till I figured out what you just said, which is the requirement is if it's less than 0.5 grams of trans fat, then they don't need to say there's any. So 0.49 grams is as good as zero as far as the labeling is concerned, but it's not zero as far as your health is concerned. And so that is something to keep in mind. And the game that people play nowadays, manufacturers play, is they just decide to make the serving size such that they don't have to claim it is more than 0.5 grams. And so these are some of the things. And so the simple rule of thumb, given what you said, Vijay, is if it's fried in the making of that meal, it's going to have it. So as far as possible, avoid it every now and then. We all want to enjoy what we like, but make sure it's once in a while and not very often.
Precisely. I often think about how our, as a community, we are very savvy with how we plan our investments, how we spend our money, how we invest in our career, how we prioritize education, things like that, right? And I think we should have a similar approach and think about our body as a temple and be responsible about what is it that you're putting in your body, right? I mean, this is the biggest ROI that you get is you, right? What else is more important than you being fit so you can be there for whatever your values are, right? It's not vanity. So I think how you eat, what you eat, and especially when you think about fats, you have to think about also the fact that fats are higher in calories. That cannot be taken out, right? So using fats in a way that is responsible. So if you're doing tadka, do a small amount of tadka, right? Usal does not have to have oil on top. It doesn't require that type of cooking. Be responsible with ghee, right? A small amount of ghee can give you a lot of flavor, and that's good enough. Of course, if you add more, because fats are flavor enhancing, it'll become more flavorful. But I think we need to think about balancing. I mean, we have so many different tastes that we can sense from our tongue and honor that, right? So yeah, I can keep talking about this, but I know we have questions. So
yeah. No, so I want to make one other point, because I think this is one of those things that is not as well understood as one would imagine, and that is when you have fats, carbs, protein. What a lot of people don't realize is if I had 10 grams of some of a food that's all carbs, 10 grams of a food that's all protein, and 10 grams of food that's all fat. That 10 grams of carbs and 10 grams of protein is 40 calories each. But the 10 grams of fat is 90 calories. So you feel like you've eaten the same amount, but the calorie count is so much higher. And now within that, I think as you were describing this, I was thinking to myself, effectively, just like we maintain our financial portfolio, you want some amount in stock and some amount in bonds and so on. I think a good way to think about this is you want most of your stuff in the good carbs, the complex carbs. You want a good amount in protein, you want a good amount in fiber, and you want a good amount in the unsaturated fat. The saturated fat and the the simple carbs are the ones that you should have very little. It's almost like my, the high risk part of the portfolio that you keep a little bit of. Sure, keep it in that. And I think it's a really nice framework that you've provided, which is how to think about this. Because if we can just prioritize unsaturated fats, proteins, fibers, and complex carbs, it still can be a very, very tasty meal, very satiating meal, and yet, you improve your health outcomes dramatically.
Right. I think that the proportions of these things that you're talking about, right, which you prioritize, I'd be happy to come back on and talk more about the proportions, right? So I think we are, as a community, comfortable with thinking about, these frameworks, because we don't, I think most of us are, prioritize efficiency, right? So when you think about these proportions, simpler frameworks like that can help us, execute this on most days. And you can, of course, have days where you are indulging. But most days you can basically,
Yeah, agreed. I want to I know I have we have, Vijay, come up with about 10, 12 questions. I've gotten through 2 of them, but I think we don't have to go through any of them because the questions from the community are the ones we really wanted to go after. So let's talk about some of them. A number of people have asked, how do you rate mustard oil?
yeah. So mustard oil is another very flavorful oil, and I actually have some mustard oil in my pantry. However, when you think about the nutrient profile, it does have the amount, the ratio of saturated to unsaturated is not as beautiful and clean as olive oil or as even sunflower oil. So I would definitely have that in the pantry and use it for some foods, right? I think how we cook, we must think about how are we cooking. And if possible, if you can do tadka with slightly less oil, then do that. What is the lowest amount of oil I can use in my tadka is what you want to think about, such that the food is also flavorful. And then make sure that you mainly have these foods. And I would avoid cooking with ghee. And I would avoid cooking with coconut oil, like large amounts, right? That because, that's very important. Small amount is okay. But mustard oil is definitely an oil that I think you can cook with in smaller amounts.
Along those lines, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Vijay, was one of the topics that has been a hot topic, I guess, has been this extra virgin olive oil. Okay. Olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. What is your take on all of it?
So the way the oil is extracted basically is giving it the virgin name. When you're treating it gently and when you're treating it with techniques like cold pressing, that becomes extra, basically virginizing it. When the extra virgin is not included in the name, basically it's removed, it's devoid of some of those compounds. Extra virgin olive oil is the most flavorful part of the type of olive oil. Everything gets processed, and every processing renders change in nutrient composition, renders change in flavoring, renders change in bioavailability. Extra virgin olive oil versus regular olive oil doesn't change bioavailability, it changes flavor. So I would say that if you want to have high flavor and if you want to have those polyphenols, antioxidants, slightly more nutritive, then I would go for the extra virgin olive oil. But the jury is still out whether plain olive oil has any, is more harmful than extra virgin olive oil. There is no such studies that have shown that. So I would say that if you like the flavor of extra virgin olive oil, many of the nutrients, the micronutrients, are more preserved with this cold press technique. It's just simple, right? You can understand that. So I would go for those. So I personally I use small amounts of oil because I use those that have high flavor, so I can still flavorize my food, but use it in small amounts. So I always choose, it's like coffee beans, right? You want something that is high in flavor so that you can kind of still taste it, but you don't have to use a whole lot. So from that perspective, I would choose extra virgin olive oil, but regular olive oil, if that is budget friendly for you, I would go for it.
And is olive oil one of the best when it comes to the saturated versus unsaturated fat ratios?
Not really. There are, most plant oils like, canola oil actually has a slightly better profile even. It's just that olive oil has been studied, proven in randomized controlled trials that it is actually, has cardiovascular benefits. So that's why we use, and the reason canola oil gets its bad reputation is because of the rapeseed being genetically modified. But canola and corn, I didn't talk about corn as much. Those are the oils that are commonly used in commercial cooking because they are so cheap, because they can be, soybean oil is the other one, right? So corn and soybeans are subsidized and genetically modified. Rapeseed in Canada, genetically modified. They are, less cost, and that's what you see in commercial. Then I would not say that those you want to completely avoid them. Again, we have not studied this in settings that can surely tell us that genetic modification of these oil have harmful effects. That has not been studied, but because we know that that there's some amount of alteration there, maybe we don't know enough. And if you have the opportunity to choose oils where there is no such controversy, then good to avoid them.
Got it. So if you had to, if you spoke, Vijay, about in your own home, what are the oils you would keep and what are the oils you would not keep? What would they be?
Yeah. So I would not keep, in terms of not keeping, I would start with, I would not keep ghee as a fat in my house. I would not keep,
Sorry, Vijay, you broke up for about 7-8 seconds. We couldn't hear anything. So could you just repeat? Yeah.
Okay. So the oils that I would not keep are, so I would not keep ghee for cooking. I would not keep coconut oil for cooking. I would not keep, I also don't keep peanut oil for cooking, because these are things that, if I'm cooking with them and I like their flavor and you accidentally put too much, then you're basically, I'm not too happy with the nutrient profile. So I keep them in a separate section in my house where I dress salads, or, after a meal, if I feel like I want to have a little bit, so they're in a separate section. In where I cook, I use olive oil, I use avocado oil, I have sunflower oil, and those I usually, can circulate. And then I have sesame oil, which I also like to cook with. I also have mustard oil. I think I have 5 usually.
Great. I think that helps.
Yeah, but I use very little oil in my cooking, and my oil, I use different flavors. So cooking technique is something that I'm very passionate about. So I use cooking techniques that can be flavor enhancing without overly relying on fat as a flavor enhancer. So when I do that, I don't need a whole lot of fat.
How do these different oils get digested or affect the microbiome?
So the ultra filtration and processing can impact, or can decrease the microbiome diversity. Right? The more processed, the less of these micronutrients, the lower the diversity. I think you have to prioritize microbiome diversity. So when you're thinking about processing from that perspective, I would just say that, refined versus unrefined, have a combination of like unrefined oils and refined. Extra virgin and olive oil are similar. So we think about refined oil, right? So unrefined versus refined, I would have a combination of both, such that, your unrefined oils you use more for like salads and things. And if you are ending up using refined oil because they are more commercially available, you can use those, but choose the unsaturated ones. I lost you. I can't hear you.
We'll do a couple of quick questions because I know we're out of time. Impact of oil on triglycerides.
High. Yeah, they have very high impact. Triglyceride levels. I mean, we should have a conversation on food and triglycerides. They are it is one of the most effective dietary strategies, or one of the most effective ways compared to all other cholesterol markers to lower triglycerides. Dietary strategies are the most effective. And oil is definitely a huge factor. So yes, I would, if you have a triglyceride issue, start looking at where is your oil coming from and how much oil are you eating.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to your point about, we have to use oil, but keep it to a minimum. Good, use the right oils, but that too in a minimum.
Yeah.
How long can oils be stored? Because Costco sizes last a long time.
Yeah, I think the thing to think about is keeping them in airtight containers. Oxidation is an issue when it exposes to air, right? So don't keep your oil like open, and keep them, if you keep them tight, I think they last almost at least a year. They can last, but don't quote me on it. I don't specifically know this, but off the top of my head, from what I have learned culturally, as long as you're storing them in an airtight container.
Got it. Yeah, is using an air fryer a good choice?
Yes, we thank you for that question. We should have talked about this earlier, but definitely, I think the technique that air fryers use with the way the air circulates gives you the texture, and you can get away with using very little oil. So I would highly, air fryer is a must-have kitchen gadget. We can do a whole session on kitchen gadgets, actually.
There are just so many topics. What is more satiating, fat or protein? I mean, I guess we should balance satiating with healthy as well.
Right. Satiating is fat because, think about it. It has, twice the amount of calories than protein, right? So satiety is achieved with fat. However, satiety can also, interestingly, be achieved with volume, fiber, right? So why not think about, does it have to be only protein and fat? Why not fiber, right?
Yeah. Any suggestions on a FODMAP test? Anyone you recommend?
FODMAP test? So there's a FODMAP diet, which is usually prescribed for SIBO, and I think it is a very, very restrictive diet, but can be very effective if you work with a dietitian and follow the university in Australia came up with the first FODMAP framework, and that has been now translated in other cuisines as well. And I think that it's a very good dietary cleanse strategy if you have SIBO, and then working on how much you have to follow that with a dietitian or a healthcare provider, such that you can transition out of those FODMAP foods. Usually it's a cleanse. Think of it like that, right? Giving your body a chance to get rid of the other foods and oligosaccharides that can perpetuate SIBO.
It's like a kickstart when you want to get onto it and then quickly move out of it. And maybe last question, any microbiome test that you recommend?
Well, not off the top of my head. I would only recommend it if you are expecting that you have problems. But before I jump into understanding the microbiome, and I think our interpretation of the microbiome is limited because we don't know so much. So I would be cautious about these tests, but I would start focusing on cleanses and kickstarts that you can do at home to see whether your microbiome is improving. Happy to talk more about that in the next conversation, where you can reset your gut and then slowly work forward.
Yeah. I think microbiome is a big topic, and one that, like you said, is still not completely understood. There's great research going on, but the number of companies that are out there selling a microbiome test, hyping it up, when it is actually not very actionable unless you have a very specific issue.
Correct.
And so, the
allergy tests are better that way, right? But microbiome tests, that's why I can't come up with anything, because I think we don't know so much about it. We will in the next, I'd say, decade, probably, but not now.
And Stanford is one of the places where the most advanced microbiome research is happening. Right?
Exactly.
And the experts there will say there is no test we recommend. But
Exactly.
people who are outside are recommending tests left, right, and center. So,
Exactly.
Kamal, to your question, there is no microbiome test that at least Vijay and I would recommend. But that doesn't stop people outside from recommending it heavily.
Yeah, we are trained to be that way, right? I mean, we basically, but yeah, sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I think lots and lots to discuss. But Vijaya, thank you so much. There's a lot of love coming your way in the comments and all of that. But as always, you just make these topics so interesting, so practical that I think each of us can go back with some very specific things that we can change relative to what we are doing. And if all we took away is reduce the amount of oil you put into anything, that's already an amazingly big step, and it should show up in our next blood test result.
Exactly. And treat your body like a temple. It deserves it.
Yeah.
It's doing so much for you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Vijaya, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. I look forward to speaking with all of you again.
Can't wait. All right, Vijaya. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.